These encounters took place a few years back, when I was around 14 years old. I was a young, naive girl, and it did not register in my head at the time that these encounters were rather unsettling. My family traditionally goes camping a few times every summer. Some of our trips are rather spontaneous, meaning our selection of campgrounds are limited. We managed to book a site for a week at a campground about an hour away. When we arrived, we were thrilled. The whole place was practically empty, and we booked a site with an amazing view that overlooked a deep valley. We loved the seclusion. However, in hindsight, the few people we did come across were rather startling. My first encounter happened in the girls' bathroom, which was always empty, apart from this one time. I wanted to take a quick shower mid-afternoon. This particular washroom only had one shower. When I exited the shower, there was an elderly woman waiting outside the door. I smiled and said hello. She struck up a small conversation. Nothing crazy, just asking how I was enjoying my trip. I politely responded that I was having a blast, and she honestly seemed harmless and very kind. I then proceeded to make my way over to the mirror to brush my hair, while she slowly shuffled off into the shower. She quickly calls me over and asks me how to turn the water on. I explained to her that the shower is sensory operated and to simply wave your hand in front of the eye. I noticed that she's obviously not shy, as she had already started to undress herself in front of me. I quickly walked back to the mirror out of humiliation and continued brushing my hair. She yells out a thank you and turns the water on. However, she does not close the door. Instead, she begins showering with it open and calls me over once again. I didn't go close because I didn't want to invade her privacy. She asked me if I had any soap with me, as she unfortunately forgot to bring some along with her. I yell out over the sound of the shower that sorry, I can't help, and that I'm leaving now. When I was returning to the campsite, the thought of her leaving the door open did not strike me as strange. I found it rather hilarious. I quickly ran back to tell my amusing story to my little sister. She laughed and wanted to see the situation for herself. Not even 2 minutes later, we were back at the washrooms, but the slow creeper lady was gone. My second encounter is more unnerving. It was an encounter with two park rangers who apparently desperately needed to help out two young girls. First, some backstory. My sister and I wanted to go visit a playground situated in the campground one evening during our trip. My mom said it was alright with her, as we knew the directions and my dad was down by the water, which was close to the park. The playground was quite far away from our campsite, but the walk through the park was enjoyable. It was nice to walk under beautiful trees and explore a little. However, it was also a little creepy as everything felt abandoned. There were no other campers around. We finally arrived at the park, but blocking the entrance was a park ranger vehicle. Standing beside the vehicle were two rangers. There was a young woman accompanied by a young man. The woman says to my sister and I that she and her partner have lost the keys to their vehicle, but they need our young eyes to help them search. Back then I simply wanted to help anyone who seemed to be in distress. I quickly responded that my sister and I would be happy to help. The woman smiles at her partner, directing us to look around the vehicle. Then she tells us that we can open up the doors and look inside, in case she dropped them on any of the seats. No red flags had gone off in my head at this point, but I felt uncomfortable going inside a vehicle that didn't belong to me. After a while, I told them that we should really be going now. Their faces dropped, but they did not prevent us from leaving. My sister and I walk off in the direction of the park, and she quickly whispers to me that she thought the whole encounter was strange. I shrugged it off, telling myself that they were just in need of some help. After some time spent on the seesaw, my dad joined us at the park. I noticed the woman from the vehicle walking nearby. I call out to her asking if she was able to find her keys. She yells back hesitantly that she was able to retrieve them, but quickly turns her head away and walks off. Maybe she felt nervous because of the presence of my dad? Later on, my sister explains our encounter with the rangers to my parents at our campsite. My mom says it was a good thing that we did not go inside the car, and only at this moment it registers in my head that that could have been a possible abduction. My husband and I went camping for the first time ever in Arizona as part of our long trip out west. I had picked out this really cool place that was on a mountain overlooking a beautiful landscape. It's next to a cliff in a really isolated location. I'm talking like 20 miles out on gravel roads in the middle of a national forest. So we get there, set up our tent, and hike a little bit and take pics of the surrounding area. We see a few cars parked around two tents and decide to stop and talk to the other campers nearby, because we had heard that there was going to be a bad storm that night. These were 4 guys who were from Arizona, and they told us not to worry and that storm didn't get that terrible around this area. That was all the persuading that we needed to stay. Later on, while walking a bit further down the campsite, we see a woman there with her dog and another older lady. We smile and wave and continue to hike down a bit further into the forest. Let me elaborate that. Because of the storm, we are one among maybe a total of 7 campers that decided to stay and withstand the night. We watch the sunset when we get back to our site, make sure our car was only a few yards away, and go into our tent when it gets too dark to see. There are no stars tonight, due to the storm clouds, and it hasn't begun to rain yet, so we decided to try to sleep right away so that we could possibly get sleep through the storm when it does hit. It is an insanely windy night, so it's hard to sleep, but eventually we get a bit of shut-eye. I wake up at about 10:30 p.m. to the sound of some crazy thunder rolling through the mountains, and rain hitting down on our tent. I'm a little freaked out because they got a lot of flash floods out here, and I didn't want to fall off the side of the cliff, but I tell myself to try to sleep and eventually I doze off again. It's 12 a.m. and I'm awake again, this time because I hear something heavy hitting the side of our tent. Like full on sounded like someone could have been punching our tent and sliding something down the side of it. I open my eyes and I can't see anything. It's completely dark, no light whatsoever. The sound continues every couple of minutes and at this point I'm shitting bricks. Suddenly I hear footsteps right next to the side of my tent. They're slow, but steady. I feel my entire body freeze up. I seriously start thinking about how this is it and I'm going to die. My heart is beating so fast that I'm certain whatever is out there can hear it. Then, whatever it is, let out a deep sigh right on the opposite side of the tent. I'm thinking it's a bear and realizing that I might actually have to face this thing, so, in a desperate call for my husband's mind-reading powers, I squeeze his hand really hard, repetitively, and he wakes up. But instead of reading my mind, he blurts out, "What's wrong? Why are you squeezing my hand?" Right as he says this, the footsteps stop. I don't hear the footsteps again. So after a while, I break out of my frozen state and tell him what I had heard. We decided it may have been an animal passing by. But whatever is hitting our tent continues every so often. I'm starting to go a little insane from this night, wondering what is going on. We convince ourselves that it's just pines falling from the trees above, and try to sleep again. We just need to make it through one night, then we can laugh about all of this in the morning. A couple minutes go by and suddenly the tent caves in on my husband's side, right on his head. He whispers that it feels like something is pushing the tent down. I feel my heart instantly sink. I'm freaking out, thinking it's a bear that just sat on his head. But he decides to push back and we hear the familiar noise of something sliding off of our tent that we've been hearing for the past few hours. We then realize that it's been snowing outside and that the noise we heard hitting our tent was heavy ice falling from the trees onto our tent. Our tent is covered in thick ice and my husband pushes the tent from the inside until all of it slides off. Still determined to make it through the night, and a little relieved that it was just ice and not a bear, we try to sleep and make it to sunrise. We keep on a small light that my husband luckily brought with him just to calm us down a little. Things are starting to seem normal again. We'd both close our eyes. It's 3 a.m. at this point. Not even 30 minutes after we're settling down, my literal worst nightmare happens. Out of the pitch black night, we hear a woman screaming. We distinctly hear her say, "What the fuck? Oh my god, what the fuck?" Followed by some other non-tangible words that sound something like help. The way that she screams doesn't sound like anger, it sounds like pure terror and a sense of panic. My husband and I are both frozen looking at each other. I quickly shut off our light and start panicking and asking what we should do, because what the fuck? How is this really happening right now? While we are trying to decide what to do for the next few minutes, we hear her again. But this time she's screaming, "No, no, 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 no," as we hear a car speed off into the night. I'm in tears at this point. We have no idea what's happening. It's dead silent now, save for the icy rain hitting our tent. It definitely sounded like she wasn't in the car, but more like she was desperately yelling after it or begging not to be hurt. And this was the breaking point. Because I could take the bad weather. I could take the possible bear outside my tent. I could even take ice falling on our heads in one of the warmest states in America. But one thing I cannot and will never be able to handle is a screaming person in the middle of the pitch black woods at 3 a.m. We decided to get the fuck out of there and even contemplate leaving our tent and booking it to our car. but instead we try to stay level-headed to grab our valuables and put them in the car first. We frantically gather our things and stay close as we shuffle to our car. I close the door and keep the lights off for a while, scared to attract any unwelcome visitors. And while my husband goes back to grab the tent, I start the car and dial 911. I tell them what I'd heard, where we are, and they say they're sending someone to the campsite to make sure everything is okay. Only thing is, we are literally in the middle of nowhere, and it will definitely take them more than an hour to arrive. Not to mention, the storm left those gravel roads in some pretty terrible conditions. So my husband and I started driving, and it's like 3 a.m. now. As we drive out to the campsite, my husband notices one last eerie detail that stuck with me. The 4 guys that we had talked to earlier had left. All 3 of their cars were gone, while their tents remained. Whatever scared them off, they sure left in a hurry. It was only after we started driving that the thought occurred to me. Whatever was walking next to my tent may not have been an animal. It very well could have been something lurking around in the dark, who decided to go after the girl we had previously seen on our hike. I'm not quite sure what went down on the Lone Mountain that night, and I hope that everyone got out okay.